So what makes a good story? All right? What makes a good story? You'll hear me say this a lot, and the fundamentals are pretty clear to me. Compelling characters, overcoming obstacles to achieve a worthy outcome. I want you to think about that. Compelling characters, overcoming obstacles to achieve a worthy outcome. Pretty much every movie you've seen, pretty much every novel you've read involves some variation of that formula. It's also the scientist determined to make her next discovery, the farmer, Rorik, up against the elements, the villager confronting drought, the explorer striving to protect land and wildlife, the planet struggling to sustain itself. So we'll see that story now, the planet struggling to sustain itself, and put that in that context of story. And to get us there, I'm going to invite my colleague, Dr. Imani Cheers, to make the introductions and be with you for the next bit. Imani?
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is a really amazing group. I'm impressed. This is my 4th summit, and it's just really exciting to see how it's grown over the years. I'm excited to hear your stories today. But let's zoom out a little bit, okay, and consider the stakes. With science currently under siege, how do we give the story of the planet the narrative power that it actually deserves? How can story help us wrap our brains around the scope as well as the stakes? Our first 2 presenters today are master storytellers who have been chronicling the world all of their professional lives. Jim Richardson, where's Jim? Hi, good morning, is a photographer for National Geographic and a contributing editor for Traveler magazine. His work has taken him to more than 50 countries across the globe. His coverage of food and agriculture has been at the centerpiece of National Geographic's stunning work in this area. Dimick, good morning, sir, is a good friend of Planet Forward, a National Geographic Society picture editor for over 35 years, and the magazine's environmental editor for more than a decade. Dennis pioneered Nat Geo's coverage of beautifully photographed, uncommonly powerful, long-form format reports on food, security, water, pollution, energy, and climate change. Together, Dennis and Jim launched Eyes on Earth. The story they tell is incredibly urgent, and it's graphic. Please welcome Jim Richardson and Dimick. I will be back, Dennis Dimick. I will be back afterwards to facilitate a conversation, but we'll let these 2 gentlemen get us started. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. We'll go together.
Thank you so much.
There you go, Dennis.
Thank you. Well, so we're 2 characters, or do we have a compelling story to tell?
Well, I do hope so. Yes. So.
Well, let's give it a try. So.
Yeah.
We need to have our little.
Our show on screen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So Dennis and I have been doing this song and dance a long time, haven't we?
That's right, and we met each other in Topeka, Kansas in 1973. So we've been.
We go back a ways.
We go back a ways, and we started working together in 1990 at the National.
That long ago?
And so we're going to.
For God's sakes.
But
okay,
let's go back a little further here, and let's talk about.
So.
Let's talk about who are we? Who are we, Jim?
Well, I think there's an important thing to say here before you kind of get into that. And I think anytime, even though we got that wonderful introduction, I think for all of you sitting in an audience, you know, you should always have in the back of your mind, why the heck should we listen to these guys?
Right.
You know, and more important, is this somebody we could actually talk to? You know, is this somebody we could relate to? Are these real people? You know, and so we want to start out here with here I am, must be about 1953, bucket feeding a calf out on the farm in Kansas. Okay, has anybody here ever bucket fed a calf? All right, we're in a club, aren't we? You know, we are responsible citizens of the world. You know, there's nothing like bucket feeding a calf to make you feel like you've entered into the citizenship of mankind, I swear.
Well, Jim, but you're not alone in your getting close to the land. And
Him.
so here I am. I was probably about 12 early on in my 4-H career. We raised purebred Suffolk sheep on our farm in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, right clear out in the far northwest of this continent, a continent away from here. And it wasn't just sheep. I was also, given my Irish roots, it was imperative that I raise some potatoes, and this was part of one of my 4-H projects. And then the question of how to pay for college came along, and this is how it was done. Baling hay, we did it for $10 a ton, cut, rake, and bale.
You're looking pretty hunky there.
Yeah, well, and then I used some of that money and bought a camera, and this is one of the first pictures that got published. I had this published in the student paper at Oregon State University. So there you go. That's the beginning of this whole adventure.
We did not have mountains out on the plains of Kansas. You know, we did not go camping up on Mount Hood. We went camping in the backyard, and there I am with the blanket tent out in a summer out there. And first day of school, and you'll notice that I've got my 48 color Crayola box, brand new, and my jeans are all wrapped up at the cuffs, you know. And here a little bit later, we always took a picture in the front of the same tree out there. But here's one of my airplanes. I was a kid that had a lot of hobbies because I was out on the farm kind of by myself, so I did all those kind of things. And one of the things I did was photography. And so this was my entry in the county fair, the North Central Kansas Free Fair. And the judge, I really loved the judge because, well, she liked my pictures. And she came along and she was remarking on how I'd used framing and I used these parallel lines and all these kind of things. And I thought, you know, she just understands photography perfectly. She's a brilliant judge, you know. And then she went on and judged the big ears of corn and the tomatoes and the quilts, you know. But no matter, the encouragement got me going. And then 30 years later, here we are.
Here we are standing here.
Magically gathered, yes?
Right, that's right. And we've worked on, starting in 1990, we worked on more than 20 stories. 3 of them here, I mean, on the Great Plains. We did a story on soil and soil conservation and a big series on how are we going to feed the planet at mid-century and beyond.
But what happens in between is illustrative that none of these things happen overnight. You don't just automatically set out to do these kinds of things and then it happens. In our case, we started doing stories together.
Colorado River was the
Colorado
first
River,
one, right?
The overextension of the resource, the intensive use of it.
We looked at the Ogallala Aquifer, this big underground reservoir in the high plains, right?
In my backyard out there in Kansas, that's right.
We're drawing it down.
And the incredible scenes that you would see of people, of people trying to keep that resource going as it's being depleted.
And then then we did a story on sustainable agriculture and organic farming years before there was a standard set for what is organic in this country.
That's right. An idea that came from you, and you would see scenes there like Mary Jane Butters and Nick Ogle out there trying to keep their farm together out there in the Palouse of Washington. And growth on the Front Range.
That's right. Just the whole area around Denver, east of the Rockies, the massive transformation of urbanization. And here we got to come back to my part of the world.
That's right.
We did a big story on the earthquakes and volcanoes of the Pacific Northwest, the Cascadia Subduction Zone, it's called.
I'd hardly seen the Pacific Ocean before I started working on that story.
Yeah, so here we are. This is the former Mount Mazama, now Crater Lake, and then a story on the Columbia River. Since I was a kid of the Columbia River Valley, I wanted to be able to be a homie and do stories about my part.
Great fun. Great fun. And out there in the Columbia, which was we had done the Colorado River, we did the Columbia River, we ended up doing the Mississippi River. We got to be the water team after a while, didn't we?
The river guys.
Yeah. And then by about 1900, or 2000, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've been around a while. Been around.
I'm not that old.
Looking pretty
We started
good,
somehow focusing more on food.
That's right.
Food
right
and agriculture, feeding the planet.
we started looking at issues of food safety. We looked at the genetic engineering of crops to do things like keep pests from damaging crops.
Genetic modification, that's right. And
then we did soil, and we did soil here, the Palouse of the Pacific Northwest. And here, for example, this pair of pictures to me is really illustrative of this idea that soil is destiny. That which you inherit as part of the landscape you are of can largely determine your fate in the world.
And mostly trying to connect the soil with the people that depended upon it, which is, well, all of us.
Right.
And the kinds of places that agriculture originated, like Ethiopia, where I saw these people out harvesting with sickles out there in the hot fields.
And it was all part of a story that we did on looking at preserving the genetic diversity in the food system. And this is Carrie Fowler of the Global Crop Diversity Trust up in Svalbard, right?
That's right.
Where all the seeds from all the nations of the world come to be stored to save civilization in case some calamity might be.
Because essentially, if we don't have that genetic heritage of 8,000 years of domestication, we are in great peril.
That's right. So that's kind of the things that we've been doing. And then while Jim was off doing other kinds of stories on archaeology at all, I was also involved in other stories, like a big project in 2004 on climate change, global warning bulletins from a warming world. Later, a big story called The Big Thaw, and we worked with James Baylog, who you may have heard did a project called Extreme Ice Survey, and later a film came out of this called Chasing Ice. And then we did a year-long series on population, the world at 7 billion and beyond. And in essence, what these were, it was a sort of a conversation about some of these emergent big issues that have.
So now we come to the place that we say, you know, kind of why Dennis and I are here. Then we can ask that same question. Why are we here on the level of all of you, of why are we here? Why are we here together? What's the thing that has drawn us together, the things that Frank has been referring to? And then we can answer that question on an even greater layer. Why is mankind here? Why have we reached this point in our human history? And where are we in that story that we have all come together here today and been put at this crux in our human history that brings us together? And I want to let Dennis start out here with that essential story.
With the blue planet, the green planet, the planet that we call home. And believe it or not, it all gets down to this little chemical equation called photosynthesis. The power of sunlight comes down, plants take that energy, convert it into sugars and woods and all the things, the grasses make seeds. This is the central equation of all life on the planet. And it all came from this, whether it's the sun that's falling on the earth today or the sunshine that fell on the earth hundreds of millions of years ago, and the energy that was stored that we still rely upon today.
From here, let me take this story forward, and we're going to go back 5,000 to 10,000 years. We're going to go back 5,000 to 10,000 years when this was happening. For our purposes, we're going to go to the Orkney Islands off the northeast coast of Scotland, where a new wind was blowing through the minds of people. The Neolithic Age was coming. Now that means New Stone Age, but what it really means is a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing the world. And so what they were doing, things like this. They were putting up the stones of Stennis, this first of the great stone circles, 700 years before Stonehenge. And they were marking their land. They were settling down. They were no longer going to be the hunter-gatherers. They were going to be settled. They were doing things like this, building houses. Wonderful houses, really. I mean, you can look in that thing and you can see that there's beds on the sides and there's a hearth and there's a dresser back there. And when it blew out of the sands in 1850, there were actually like combs and brooches lying on that dresser shelf there. They were very human people. I like to say, you know, that's not such a bad house, you know. I've stayed in worse hotel rooms, you know. They were doing halfway well, you know. And they were thinking about time differently. They were building these big tombs. These tombs, this is a chambered cairn there, you know. And they were building these big tombs because they were thinking differently about time and their ancestors. So you would take, in those chambers around there, you'd come in there with your ancestors' bones. You'd bring in Uncle Frank's skull, okay? And Grandpa Dennis's thigh bone, you see, and you'd put them all together. You might put those all together in one thing, and then you would put Dennis's toe over in the another chamber over there, and then 75 years later, you'd come in and you'd mix them up and you move them around. And we don't know what the heck they were thinking, but they were thinking about time differently, and that was a fundamental thing for them to do. And they were bringing in livestock. Here they are at the Stones of Stennis, and they actually still graze sheep out there at the Stones of Stennis. And 5,000 years later, the sheep are still out there scratching their itches on those 5,000-year-old stones, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But here's the big story. This is the transformational thing. They were growing grain. They were growing grain next to that tomb, which is inside that mound that you see right back there. They were growing grain. And that transformed agriculture. Now I want you to jump forward 5,000 years to today, when agriculture has transformed the planet, spawned civilizations and great cities in its wake, transformed the biosphere, made us into what we are today. So from that time when it was all serendipity and wonder and nature, it is now our designs that are upon the land. It is we who control the planet, its shape, and how it functions. And with that came that vast expansion of population. And so here we are today at 7.5, 7.6 billion. And by 2050, we're going to be up at what, 9.7 billion? And then we have, in the next 35 to 40 years, a possible transformational moment in which the human population is going to plateau, level off, and then eventually start coming down. So from that time, 10,000 years ago, when we started that agricultural story and the great expansion of human population, in your lifetimes, in the living lifetimes of your careers, we're going to know how many people are going to be on Earth at the maximum, whether we can feed them, whether or not we will have a planet left it's worth living on when we get there. That's going to happen in your lifetimes, in the lifetimes of your careers.
So how did we get here? What happened?
How did this come about?
So how did it come about? Well, for so much of human civilization, we relied on the power of what you could call current sunshine, trees growing on the land, crops growing on the field, wood that we would cut from trees and light the fires that would keep us warm and turn our wheels. But then about 300 years or so ago, we discovered a black rock that burns, coal. And it became the foundation of a huge transformation on the planet. We learned how to, what it was really, all it was the fossilized remains of ancient 400 million year old plants and animals. That's all it was. And we've dug it up and we've started lighting it on fire, and it has provided the basis for a huge transformation of human population, has provided cheap energy. Here, a coal mine in Wyoming that provides energy for power plants in the east. This coal train in Virginia provides enough energy to keep this power plant near Atlanta going for 1 week. This is the underpinning of the modern world today. It keeps the lights on at night, the lights that we enjoy here. And look at this map of the world. This is the modern world that's powered by this kind of energy. Of course, we talk about renewables, but primarily coal, oil, and natural gas are the foundation for this modern world.
And the first of those light bulbs only went on about 150 years ago.
That's right. And as you can see here, there are still big gaps on that map. There are maybe a third of us who don't enjoy or have the electricity available that we take for granted. And it's not just coal for electricity, it's also oil for mobility. All of you who maybe came here in an airplane, you rely on this liquid sunshine that brought us here. This is the Alberta forest that they've been taking it away to get at the oil underneath. It's one of the largest suppliers of oil in this country today. It's what allows us to get around. What lets us move, create cities and be mobile. And it's not just that, it also has provided the foundation of agriculture. It allowed us to mechanize food production, dramatically transforming landscapes, producing food on massive scales in a global market. Here, soybeans on a ship. And it's allowed us all to eat better, eat higher on the food chain, greater protein in our diet. Here, that a feedlot in Kansas, here, pork production in Brazil, all of this. And we need to keep in mind, though, too, that much of the crops and the feed that are given to these animals actually have been able to be grown because of nitrogen fertilizer that was produced from natural gas. It all comes back to the fossil fuel. And so what's happening, we've all moved up the food chain, we're eating better, there's more protein in our diets, but we also need to remember that there's almost 1 billion people still on the planet who are malnourished, don't have enough to eat. So there's those of us who are fortunate are here, but there are many who are not. And so what's happened is you have more energy, you have more food, and what's happening, we have gotten more people. And I myself was born in '51. There were 2.5 billion people on the planet. We have since tripled that amount. In 1900, there was 1.6 billion. In 2000, there was 6.1 billion. This year, we're at 7.5, and by mid-century, maybe we'll be at 9.7. The UN says maybe by 11 by the end of the century. If food is available, water is available, the climate system remains stable. So we've entered this whole new age that's called the human age, which is a really interesting emerging narrative about the world that we're living in, the Anthropocene. It's a proposed geologic epoch by scientists who are trying to say that, look, we're in the middle of creating a new geologic epoch. And it's essentially defined as a proposed geologic epoch defined by our massive impact on the planet, where the mark of our presence will endure long after we are gone. We're in the middle of creating that era right now. And the questions are, when did it begin? Did it begin when agriculture began? Or when perhaps the Industrial Revolution and we started burning coal, steam engines? Or did it start during the nuclear age in the middle of the last century? These are all interesting questions, but what really it is, it's about a question about establishing a new kind of narrative about our relationship to the planet, because we're in the middle of a huge, rapid transformation of the planet. And there's a dashboard. If you look at these charts, there's no point in trying to highlight this, but imagine all of these things about socioeconomic and Earth system trends. They're almost like meters, the dashboard of the planet. And examples are, for example, population is going up. You see the red date at 950. It's this era called the Great Acceleration. Energy use, water use, fertilizer, surface temperature, carbon dioxide, all of these things, they're all measures of the transformation that we have all been involved in the middle of. And scientists spend their careers trying to understand where are we going and what is the impact of all this. Here, and you can see it. You can see it here, for example, the Yangtze River at Shanghai in the 1980s. Fast forward 30 years, transformation, land transformation. Fascinating information coming from time-lapse pictures by satellites. Here, Shanghai, modern gleaming city. We've been growing cities and we've been building highways, moving to the far reaches of landscapes afforded by the mobility of fossil fuels. Here, this is out in Loudoun County in Northern Virginia. We're transforming otherwise rural landscapes into urban landscapes. It's like instant cities. We unroll our lawns and now we have a new city. And you can see it here in this from Brazil in the 1984 fast forward look. You see, we're cutting the forests, we're building reservoirs. Take a look. If you look around, what you can see is that these are transformations all by our hand cumulatively. rivers, free-flowing rivers. We dam them for flood control, for irrigation, for electricity. All of those things, we've been able to corral nature in our own service, to provide for our own life. But sometimes we're also exceeding the resource base. This is the Yellow River in China. We see this also on the Colorado River. The Aral Sea, for example, in Asia, in the year 2000, fast forward, it's virtually gone because of diversions for irrigation. Or groundwater. Groundwater is a very interesting story. If rainfall is your checking account, groundwater is like your savings account. And we're depleting aquifers worldwide. This is in northern India. In the Punjab, that green crop comes from irrigation water, fossil water, ancient water being drawn down. Here in Saudi Arabia, look here, they have fossil water. And they wanted to start growing their own wheat, so they did. And this is what they did. If you look at each circle, it's like, what, 160 acres? Well, they've drawn their fossil water down. Now they have to buy grain on the world market. But there are byproducts. So we have runoff of fertilizer that's polluting our water, or we have, for example, we have producing rice, which is one of the world's leading cereal crop, but it's also producing methane, which is a greenhouse gas which is changing the atmosphere. So we live in a world of more, really. More food, more people, more growth. And it's all underpinned by more energy. That's the root source of the prosperity that we enjoy today. And so what does it take to make that happen? Here, for example, a mountain in West Virginia that is being mined for the coal, the primary energy that runs our economy, or here in Southern California, oil. We're digging holes in the ground. We're moving mountains. This is how we power the modern world still. And to understand that it's more than just lights, electricity, and getting around, this picture here helps us understand how deeply embedded we are. Everything that you see in this picture that came out of this house came from oil. So years ago, there was John Holder and Barry Commoner and Paul Ehrlich came up with this formula called IPAT, and it's useful as a way to visualize impact. Population times affluence times technology equals impact. And what you see in the small box there, that's 1950. It is just a volumetric XYZ. Look at all this. So it's been called the Great Acceleration, and what you see here now, this is our cumulative impact, the difference between 1950 and 2011. So when we talk about population increase, it's not just numbers of people, it's also our use of materials, natural resources, and how do we do that? Well, we're cutting more forests so that we can grow more food. Here in Borneo, a former rainforest being converted into palm oil plantations, a biologically diverse community turned into utilitarian uniform. Mining fossil water here, 40,000 acres in western Texas for irrigation. Building cities in the desert. Hydraulic fracturing for natural gas in the panhandle of Texas. Salt pans in the Great Salt Desert of Utah. Looking around, what you see, there are all these patterns that are as a result of our hand, our presence on the planet.
The incredible, I was amazed when I went to Palmyra to see that when Pliny the Elder came here in the 2nd century AD, there were 2 million fig trees growing around here. So we have these incredible places where we have lost so much. We've lost all many of those coral reefs where they are dying. We've overfished so much of the world.
10 years ago, a study from University of British Columbia, Daniel Pauly, said 90% of the big fish in the sea are already gone.
Are already gone. So if we begin to that basic question that Joel Sartori is addressing when he photographs all these endangered species, why are they endangered? What's the driving mechanism that's going on here? What's the underlying cause? And for that, I'd like to take you right here to a wonderful graphic done by Randall Munroe of XKCD. Anybody follow XKCD? Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. He took data from Vaclav Smil. Anybody read Vaclav Smil? Okay, that's one of your next in your reading list, okay? I want to start here on this graphic. I want to shorthand it for you a little bit. Look at the box down at the bottom where it says elephants. That's the weight of all elephants on the planet. 1 million tons of elephants, okay? The dark area in the center, that's the weight of all humans on the planet. On the outside, there's cattle over on the left, there's pigs, there's goats, there's sheep, there's horses. All that gray stuff is all of our domesticated partners. That's the weight of all of them on the planet. The green boxes, all the rest of the wild animals. So if you want to ask the question, why are species endangered? It's because we are essentially taking the vast productivity of the planet, all of that photosynthesis Dennis was talking about, and using it for ourselves, our species, and our domesticated partners. It's actually a fairly simple formula of transitioning from land that wild animals could use to land that we appropriate for our exclusive use ourselves. It's a very simple transformation, and one of them that is very, very difficult to get around.
And so what's happened, though, are there cumulative effects of our present. It's all part of this grand narrative, big story that we're all in the middle of. Any subset of this becomes an interesting story. So we've seen a run up in CO2 levels in the atmosphere. The zigzag there is actually from in the northern hemisphere when trees put their leaves out in the spring, they start soaking up CO2. That's what the number goes down. In the fall, there's a zigzag within each year. And it's all, CO2 is important. If we didn't have it, we would be a snowball in space. But what's happening as we add more, it's a bit like adding more blankets to our bed, is we're getting a little warmer, and we're seeing impacts. And how do we know this? Because there are people like Lonnie Thompson, who's a glaciologist at Ohio State, who's been studying ice cores that have a record of the history of the climate on the planet. And one thing we know this is that in the last 17 years, 16 of the last 17 years have been the hottest years recorded. And I have to say to you that this slide is already outdated. I'm sorry to report that 2017 was the number 2 year. So I need to change it so it's 17 out of the last 18. So the temperatures are going up. You see, where do you see this? The Arctic ice cap is vanishing. We're losing it. We're losing glaciers. This work by James Balog, who I mentioned earlier here in Alaska. The water is coming off of continental glaciers like in Greenland. We're seeing sea level rise. This is in the Chesapeake Bay. I witnessed this 3 years ago along the shore of the Chesapeake Bay during a storm. And so increasingly we see these kinds of events that are happening that are as a result of the planet warming, the ice melting, the seas rising, more storms, this from Houston last summer. And these kinds of scenes that we witness become more common in the day's news and in the narrative of humanity. We're seeing more fires. In the West, we're seeing longer fire seasons as temperatures go up and situation dries out. Here, for example, this map is showing the loss of snowpack in the western United States. The western United States depends on stored water in the form of snow, and that snow is going away. So here in the southern Cascades, the northern Sierras, you see a paltry snowpack, depleted reservoirs, dry fields. These are the stories that are of past and future in the West. So we are here, we live in a desert environment. We count on the water always being there, but it's important to think back to civilizations of the past when the water ran out, the soil blew away, and the civilizations vanished. So where are we going as we close our story here, Jim?
I think there are a number of things about it, but you had a very strong reaction to that picture, as I remember when it came through.
This is one of my favorite pictures, partly because I feel like it's Jim's picture, but I feel like it's What it is like what we need to do is face up to the future that's coming. That to me, it's like these are farmers who see the storm coming, and it's okay to do that. And all we're trying to do is, it's useful to know where have we been coming from, where are we now, and where are we going? And so the question is, do we continue to go on this path of sunshine from fossil fuel? Or do we come more towards this question of trying to power our world from current sunshine once again, like we did long before we discovered fossil sunlight?
So we can ask these questions of you. Where are we going? Are we going to have more wind power in our lives? Are we going to go with solar power, nuclear power, all these various kind of things? Geothermal, will that answer our questions? Better fuel economy, the kinds of things where we can use less of the resource going into the future, more energy efficient buildings, using better light bulbs, all those kinds of questions about what are we going to do with all this CO2 and how are we going to save that planet. But you know what? That's not our story. We've been telling you our story about how we've gotten in here. This is your story. This is the story of your lifetime. This is the story of your productive careers. You are at an incredible crux of history, and we need you to make it your own, to become the eyes on earth that will watch over it and tell those stories and bring that information to people, a world that needs you to make that all real to them and to help us guide into the future as we go forward.
So that's the story that we have to tell, and what we're really here to do is to try to essentially set the table for you guys to understand what the larger context is that we're all living in, and to try to begin to pass the torch to all of you. We've been doing this for years, and now it's time for us to say, how can we help you become storytellers about this grand narrative that we're all in the middle of?
So come along with us, be our eyes on earth, and thank you very much for this opportunity to tell you that story.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was, wow, that was compelling. It's amazing. We are going to sort of limit our Q&A a little bit. I have tons of questions, but I do want to open it up to our audience. We have a couple of mic runners who are available. So if there's any questions, I'd love to hands. Yes, ma'am. Do we have a mic? Coming. Yes, thank you. If you could just introduce yourself, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
I'm Mitzi Wertheim, and back in the 70s, I started something called the Energy Conversation in order to get the Defense Department to recognize we had to address this issue. Is this going to be on the internet? I want my grandchildren to see this and everybody else. This was an extraordinary story and so compelling. Actually, it turned me into tears.
Moving. I think, I think the answer to that is yes, right?
This talk we're being live streamed right now to the world.
So yes, it is
everybody's out there watching, and Dan says it will be available. It will be online afterwards. So send everybody to.
Pictures as well, or will
yes,
your
ma'am.
heads be blocking the pictures?
Eyes on Earth. They do have a website. Which can we get
we have
a website link back up?
Right. Our URL is eyeson.earth. Go there. Jim and I just printed up brand new business cards. We'll give them.
I think it's, thank you very much. So yes, ma'am, there will be availability for you all to share this work. How have you all, because I'm curious, any other questions before I jump in and ask one final one? I don't see any hands. Okay, so this was, you gave a charge at the end of your presentation to young storytellers, and not that I want to tease the next panel, but we have young storytellers coming up to share their compelling and amazing work. Good. Why do you all think that images, and you had amazing infographics, I teach infographics, and digital and data visualization in some of my courses here at GW, but why do you all think that this is the most compelling way to tell
visuals?
This? Yes, sir, in particular.
I think you have to make it real to people. The pictures have to be more than eye candy. They have to be the kind of things that make it real, that people can connect with.
Absolutely.
They can access on a level that they can understand. And it's very important to take the scientific, technical jargon,
Right.
bring it down to the level that anybody can get it. Pictures work best for me. I hate the idea of these arbitrary rules about pictures. What I like about a picture is when it goes straight to the aha moment. You look at this thing and you go, aha, I get it.
And it brings you to tears. And it brings you compelling.
Also, this idea of when you talk about something like, for example, climate change, you can use pictures to show change. You saw the pictures of the disappearing ice cap.
Absolutely.
You saw the pictures of the receding glacier. It grabs you emotionally in ways that I love writing, but it's a different kind of way into you. And when you see visible change, you are affected in a different way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you both, Dennis and Jim, for all of this. Please go check out their site, share it. It's compelling, it's engaging, and we really appreciate everything you're doing. So we will take that baton and move forward. So
Thank you, and we have a session this afternoon.
Yes.
Please come. We're going to get more specific into what it is we're about.
More.
dive deeper.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.